Welcome to Wayback Wednesday. This is our latest feature. We will be replaying some of the best nuggets, sort of a golden oldies, if you will. And here we go.
We had somebody take us down in an airplane and then fly us down to a place and for lunch, I guess I should say.
Late lunch. To Texas Gulf Coast Regional Airport there in Angleton.
To the Runway Cafe. The cook came out, and at first we thought he was just the cook. We found out later that he was actually the owner of the place. And we just started talking with him. I don't know, how long do you think he spent with us there? It was a good 30 minutes at least.
It was a while. It was longer than we actually had time for.
Right.
But what he was saying, we weren't about to stop him. Here is the story. While we were finishing our wonderful fried seafood dinner, the cook stepped out of the building to the outside seating area to take a needed break where we were finishing our late afternoon lunch. The rather short gentleman walked to the end of our table, determined to strike up a conversation. Standing there with a bright blue round cap and a chef's apron, this 50-something-year-old man began to captivate the four of us and spin our fun trip to a totally different dimension. Actually, he is the restaurant owner and often cook at the Runway Cafe. Let me provide some definitions that will help as this story unfurls. The name Cambodia is the Americanized version of the European name for Kampuchea, the nation of the Khmer people. The language they speak is Khmer. The killing fields is the general term that refers to the years when the communist-driven Khmer Rouge brutalized the Cambodian nation and murdered millions. In the early 1970s, the Khmer Republic had a population of 8 million people and was embattled in what is known as the Cambodian Civil War, which occurred during the years 1970 to 1975. The pro-American Khmer Republic was defeated and the Chinese-backed Khmer Rouge, Rouge meaning red, and they were communists, overtook the nation. In other words, the communists overtook the republic and would viciously rule until 1979. As we listened, Mr. Ou brought up the Khmer Rouge and the killing fields. I told him, knowing the time frame, I thought of that as soon as he began to tell his story, but that I did not want to bring up those words first. He went on to tell how they were forced to work in fields and that children as young as 6 were required to work long, hard days. Many of these children were orphans, as the Khmer Rouge, led by Prime Minister Pol Pot, executed anyone deemed a professional or intellectual or anyone connected to a foreign nation, even missionaries. The Khmer Republic military personnel were also killed. After 2 warnings of not following orders of the regime, people would be sent to re-education camps, which ultimately meant death. All these individuals were buried in mass graves, and some even were forced to dig their own graves. These are the actual killing fields and consisted of many locations. This term was coined by Cambodian journalist Dith Pran, who escaped the Communist Party of Kampuchea, also known as the Khmer Rouge. This evil regime ruled from 1975 until 1979, which finally ended when the Vietnamese invaded the nation, halting the deadly regime. It is reported that 1.4 million remains have been discovered, and estimates range up to 3.4 million people were actually murdered in those years. In the late 1990s, we had a service at a Khmer Baptist church in Lowell, Massachusetts. It was interesting to hear a young preacher from Dallas, Texas, with a definite North Texas accent when speaking English, be able to speak perfect Khmer without his Texas twang. Steve did a creation lesson in English as the pastor translated his words into Khmer. This pastor had married a Cambodian woman, and he had a heart for the Khmer people that had found their way to America, escaping the killing fields. That day, one woman told me that many people removed their glasses as they were thought to possibly be intellectuals if they wore glasses, and that intellectuals were killed immediately. The regime did not want any educated people to remain alive. I'm so glad that the 4 of us were able to hear Mr. Ou's testimony that day. Since I did not want to depend on our memories and didn't think to record him, I called the restaurant on Saturday night. I knew he would be super busy and did not expect him to be able to talk. I just wanted to get the spelling of his name and wanted to fill in a few gaps. An hour later, we hung up, both glad for the call. Back to his story. Mr. Yanara Ou was born in Phnom Penh, Cambodia in 1963. Soon his family learned that their son had a heart condition. He was said to have blue baby disease. On April 17th, 1975, the Khmer Rouge overtook Cambodia. 3 days later, on April 20th, 1975, Yanara's family was forced from their home in Phnom Penh. They walked for 26 days to get to his grandparents' home. But the fact that Yanara's dad was a teacher in the Kradik province, and being an educated man, he would be sought out by the Khmer Rouge, and anyone near him could be put to death. Yanara's dad knew that they needed to get away from his parents' home for their personal safety, as the village leaders knew that he was a teacher, and would turn him in order to gain favor and position with the Khmer Rouge. One of Yanara's uncles had already been taken by the Khmer Rouge. Yanara's family was offered passage to a village in the Porsat province, which is in the direction of Thailand. They would live in Porsat until the end of the killing fields. When arriving in Porsat, his dad was asked what his occupation was. He said he was a taxi driver because if they knew he was educated, he would have been executed. Always armed with both long and short butt AK-47s, the soldiers patrolled everyone and everywhere. The people lived in huts and in a communal setting. Along with children 6 years old and older, Yanara was taken away from his parents and lived in a children's center. Everyone had assigned jobs. His first job was shooing the birds from the rice fields. His dad was assigned to raise chickens and ducks. His mom served as the cook for the community. She mainly cooked rice soup, which contained very little rice. The food was rationed. Yanara was able to work with his dad. When he turned 13, he became a frontline leader and was forced to dig the river deeper. Standing in chest-deep water was very hard work, and especially hard on him because he was sickly due to his heart condition. His mother knew that the village leaders needed someone who knew geometry to measure the fields. She took the chance and told them that her son Yanara knew geometry and that he could do the job. This information could have cost his life, but thankfully it did not. Given twine, he measured the hectare acres for more rice fields. While patrolling and sitting in the trees, the Khmer Rouge soldiers would drink tea sweetened with palm sugar, and oftentimes they would let Yanara join them to drink some of the pleasant beverage. Yanara continued to state that he believes it was God's favor that protected him and his family. As a teen, Yanara spent 3 years, 8 months, and 20 days under the brutal regime of the Khmer Rouge. Yanara continued to state that he believes it was God's favor that protected him and his family, which takes me back to one of his opening comments, that he loves this country and is fearful of what he sees. But that is not where his story ends. After the liberation from the genocidal regime, his medical condition would become his family's ticket to America. He spoke of becoming a Christian and that his dad took him to the American Red Cross because he knew America would help his family. He told us that there was a string of miracles that allowed him and his family, through a Catholic organization, to reach Minnesota, where his condition was repaired at the Mayo Clinic. He lived in Minnesota for years, but now is a very proud Texan. He is extremely vocal about his opinions of our political climate and is very concerned. Here is more of the story as he told me more details during our telephone conversation on Saturday. With the invasion and overthrow of the Khmer Rouge in 1979 by the Vietnamese, his family fled as refugees to Thailand seeking medical help for him. He told us that both the Cambodian and Thailand military protected the border and would kill people crossing the border on either side. His family successfully crossed and they were able to get to Bangkok General Hospital. They were told that only one parent would be able to remain with their son if he was going to be treated. His dad would not agree, and the family was sent 4 hours away to Khao I Dang to a United Nations refugee camp. The dad was not going to let his family be separated, for they had been through the killing fields, and they were not going to be separated again. Even though he was born in 1963, this date could not be verified, and the administrators at the refugee camp determined he must be 2 years younger based on his looks. They put on his paperwork that he was born in 1965. This served as an advantage as a refugee because he was treated as a minor and not as an adult. Still today, his paperwork states his birth year as 1965. Yanara became sick again in the refugee camp. He told me that he was injected with penicillin all the time, and I asked him why penicillin, and he replied, "I guess that's all they had." A lady doctor at the camp was a godsend and helped get permission for him to return to Bangkok. She advised his dad not to let them do open heart surgery as they were not qualified. Based on the lady doctor's advice, his dad refused to let them do surgery on his son. The staff went to them 3 times to perform surgery. 16 years old at the time, Yanara remembers late one night a woman was taken into surgery, and the next thing he knew was they were telling her husband to go see her dead body. Others died after surgery. So his dad continued to refuse them to operate on Yanara. As a result, they sent them to another refugee camp. When Yanara developed a heart murmur, he was placed in ICU at Bangkok General Hospital. While there, Sister Gabrielle, a French Catholic nun, provided the money for his dad to stay there to be with Yanara. After 2 weeks in General Hospital, the INS interviewed him. Even though his family did not have a sponsor, the family was being allowed to travel to America. Another miracle, according to Yanara. As soon as they were approved to go to America, several other countries sent approvals, but Yanara's father was set on becoming an American. American. On December 16, 1980, the family arrived in America, Minnesota to be exact. Yanara underwent open-heart surgery on January 7, 1981 at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He told me he slept for 4 days and his mom was afraid he would never wake up. We determined they must have medicated him heavily to keep him asleep. He also told me that late the night before the surgery, he became frightened about having the surgery. He got in a wheelchair and placed the 2 IVs attached to him onto the wheelchair and rolled out of his hospital room. He saw the nurse's station was vacant, so he quickly went into the visitors area and hid behind the curtain. Obviously, they ended up finding him in time to perform the much-awaited and needed surgery. On January 24, 1981, he started his first day of school as a 5th grader, even though in reality he was 18 years old. But because he did not know much English and his education had been thwarted during the killing fields, they put him in the 5th grade to establish his abilities. Yanara and his Cambodian wife have 3 sons and a handful of grandchildren. His wife has her own incredible story. Yanara worked as a car salesman in Rochester, Minnesota for 16 years. He has owned the Runway Cafe in Angleton at the Gulf Coast Regional Airport for 6 years and the Baytown Seafood Restaurant for 16 years. One of his brothers works as a pharmacist at the Mayo Clinic and another brother is a banker and columnist in Florida. His other brother also lives in Florida along with his parents who are retired. One of the brothers was born in 1979 at the end of the killing fields. He also has 2 sisters. I hope to be able to meet his parents one day soon when we return to the great state of Florida. In reflection, as we first walked through the gate to be seated at the Runway Cafe, I noticed this Asian man in a funny blue hat talking to another group of people seated at the outdoor tables. When I mentioned this to him, he told me, "I ask everyone who comes in my restaurant if they can help me write my book. If you are a writer or know a writer that would be able to help Yanara put his story in print, please contact me." I hope you were touched by the story of Yanara. If you don't know about the killing fields and this horrific part of world history, I encourage you to investigate it because history has a way of repeating itself if people are not aware of it. And I encouraged him to get this written and to explain it and to tell everyone he can about the killing fields. It is a great honor to have met him and to have been able to be a part of sharing his story.